The house on Elgin Street had a guest room that hadn't been slept in for 11 years. Harriet Colborne knew this because she still changed the sheets every month. Not out of habit, but out of something she couldn't bring herself to name. She was 63 years old, recently widowed, and the kind of woman who said she was fine before anyone thought to ask. The kind of woman who kept the thermostat at 19 degrees even in February. Because her late husband Douglas had always complained about the heat, even though Douglas had been gone for 8 months now. And there was no one left to complain about anything. She owned a property management company in Ottawa, not enormous but steady. 4 residential buildings, 2 small commercial lots, a reputation for being fair and difficult in equal measure. She ran it the way she ran everything, with a calendar, a checklist, and the particular stubbornness of someone who had learned very early that feelings were a distraction. The afternoon she posted the job listing for a property maintenance supervisor, she told herself it was purely practical. One of her longtime workers had retired. The buildings needed someone reliable, someone with a license, someone who showed up. That was all. She was not looking for anything else. Aldous and Kemderim found the posting on a Tuesday. He was sitting in his truck in the parking lot of a Tim Hortons in Canada, killing time before school pickup, his phone balanced on the steering wheel. He had 40 minutes. He spent the first 20 reading the job listing 3 times, which he told himself was thoroughness and not anxiety. He was 41 years old, and for the first time in his adult life, he was not sure what he was doing. 2 years earlier, his marriage had ended, quietly, without drama, which almost made it worse. His ex-wife, Diane, was not a villain. She was simply a woman who had fallen in love with someone else, and when she told him, she cried, and he stood in their kitchen holding a dish towel and felt something go very still inside him. They had a daughter, Cora, 7 years old, gap-toothed, obsessed with weather patterns, and also with a cartoon about a dog who solved crimes. He got the apartment in Barhaven. He got Cora every other week and every second weekend, which was a sentence that made perfect grammatical sense and absolutely no emotional sense. He got a new contract with a building services company, which went well until it didn't, and by January he was freelancing, which was another word for waking up at 3 in the morning doing math. The Colborne Properties listing paid well. It asked for a red seal, which he had. It asked for 5 years of experience in residential maintenance management, which he had. It asked for someone with a valid driver's license and a reliable vehicle, which he had. It did not ask for someone who was still figuring out how to fold a duvet with only 2 hands, or someone who sometimes sat in parking lots for 20 minutes staring at a phone. But he applied anyway. He got an interview. Harriet interviewed him in her office on a Thursday morning. She had reviewed 3 other candidates. One had been late. One had spent 15 minutes explaining how his last employer had failed to appreciate him. The third had excellent credentials and kept calling her ma'am in a way that made her want to end the meeting early. Aldous and Kemderim arrived 4 minutes before the scheduled time. He knocked even though the door was open. He shook her hand and sat down and didn't build the silence with apologies or small talk. She asked him about his experience with building systems. He answered specifically and without embellishment. She asked him how he handled a contractor who delivered substandard work. He told her what he said, what he documented, what he did when they pushed back. No drama, just sequence. She asked if he had any questions. He asked about the tenant communication protocols, which was not the question she expected. She hired him the following Monday. He started in early March, when Ottawa still had the gray, exhausted look of a city that had been cold for too long and was tired of being patient about it. He drove a white pickup with a dent in the passenger door he kept meaning to fix. He wore steel-toed boots and a Colborne Properties jacket that was 2 sizes too large because the only one in the storage room had belonged to a bigger man. He was competent in the specific way that people rarely notice, because there's nothing to notice. Things simply worked. A heating unit that had been intermittently failing in the Gloucester building, fixed within a week. A drainage issue in the center town parkade that had been causing ice buildup every winter. He found the source, got a quote, presented it to Harriet with a one-page summary and 3 comparable contractor bids. She approved it in an afternoon. "You didn't ask me to meet with the contractors," she said, not critically, observing. "You have the credentials and the final authority," he said. "I don't need you in the room unless you want to be." She thought about that for a moment. Good, she said. What she didn't say. That Douglas had always wanted her in the room, had always needed her to confirm, to co-sign, to be the second voice. It had felt like partnership for 20 years and something else for the last 5. She had not realized how tired she was of being needed for her presence until someone demonstrated that they didn't need it. Cora came to the office once, on a Friday, when Aldis's usual after-school arrangement fell through, and Harriet had told him to bring her rather than leave early. She was 7, small, wearing a bright yellow raincoat that made her look like a warning sign. She walked in, looked around the office, and said, "This is a lot of filing cabinets." "Yes," Harriet said. "My dad says paper is inefficient. Your dad is probably right." Cora considered this, then climbed into the chair across from Harriet's desk, not the one beside it, but across from it as though she intended to conduct her own meeting, and asked if there were any snacks. Harriet found a granola bar in the second desk drawer. It was from October, and she wasn't entirely certain it was still good. But Cora ate half of it without complaint, and spent the next 40 minutes drawing on the back of a printed invoice, while Aldis finished a site report in the conference room. When he came to collect her, Cora held up the drawing. It was a house with a very large chimney and what appeared to be a bear in the front yard. "What's the bear for?" Harriet asked. "Security," Cora said seriously. Harriet laughed. Actually laughed. Not the short, exhaled sound she'd been producing in social situations since Douglas died, but a real laugh that surprised her and seemed to surprise Aldis, too, from the way he looked at her. "She does that to everyone," he said. "Does what?" He thought about it. "Makes things feel smaller. The problems, I mean. Not in a dismissive way. Just, she has a talent for pointing out the bear." Harriet didn't respond to that, but she kept the drawing. She put it in the second desk drawer, next to the granola bar she should have thrown out already. It was 4 months into the job when Harriet found the bracelet. She wasn't looking for anything. She was cleaning out the storage closet off the main hallway. Something she'd been avoiding for months because it was full of Douglas's things, and she had not yet found a version of herself that could deal with Douglas's things without sitting down on the floor and staying there. But she'd promised herself she would do it before April ended, and April was almost over. The box was at the back, behind his golf equipment and a collection of paint samples for a renovation they'd never started. A shoebox, floral print, edges soft with age. She remembered the shoebox. She had not opened it in 32 years. Inside, a hospital bracelet, the plastic kind the size of an infant's wrist, a photograph, a single page of a letter, handwritten, the creases deep and permanent, and a name on the bracelet in small typewritten letters that had faded but were still legible. She sat down on the floor. She sat there for a long time. She had been 21. She was not going to excuse it or explain it away, because she'd tried both of those things at various points in her life, and neither of them had helped. She had been 21 and alone in a way that had nothing to do with the people around her, and everything to do with the decision she had made, and then been told to make, and then been told again until she couldn't remember which thought had been hers first. Her parents were not cruel people. That was the part she had spent the most time on over the years. They were not cruel. They were afraid, and they were practical. and they were living in a version of the world that measured things she no longer believed should be measured. She had loved a man they would not allow in their house. She had become pregnant. They had arranged everything. She had signed the papers in a room that smelled like floor wax and other people's decisions. She had been told it was better this way. She had believed them, or she had needed to believe them, which was not the same thing but functioned identically for about a decade, until it stopped. She put the bracelet back in the shoebox. She put the shoebox on the kitchen counter, where she would have to look at it every morning. She had learned in the past year that there were some things she had to put where she couldn't avoid them, or they would disappear into the back of a closet forever. And forever had started to feel too long. She started slowly, the way you do when you're not sure you have the right. An adoption registry, a request through the provincial office, which took 3 weeks and returned a document that confirmed a match existed, but could only proceed with mutual consent. A consent form she filled out and mailed, and then did not think about for 10 days because thinking about it felt like a door she wasn't sure she should open from her side. She did not tell anyone. Not her sister in Vancouver. Not her friend Lenora, who was the person she told most things. Not her accountant or her lawyer. This was not their door. The response came on a Wednesday. The registry office confirmed. The other party had also registered consent. Contact information had been added to her file. She sat at her kitchen table with the letter and read it 4 times. The name was different. It had been changed, likely during the adoption. She had expected that. What she had not expected, could not have predicted, was that the address listed in the file would be a street in Barhaven, 8 kilometers away. She put the letter down. She sat with that for a very long time. She told herself she wouldn't look. Then she looked. It wasn't difficult. The name, combined with the street, combined with the phone number on the form, led her to a Facebook profile that was mostly private but had a profile photo. A man, 41, 42, somewhere in there, standing in front of a truck she recognized, wearing a jacket she had ordered from the supply company in November. She went to the bathroom and turned on the cold water and stood there with her hands under it until she stopped feeling like she was falling. His whole life had been 8 kilometers away. He had applied to her job posting. She had interviewed him, she had hired him. She had approved his invoices and argued with him about contractor pricing and laughed at a drawing his daughter made on the back of her documents. His daughter, her granddaughter. She turned off the water. She dried her hands. She walked back to her kitchen table and sat down and thought, with a clarity that surprised her. I have no right to tell him, and I have no right to stay silent, and I have no idea which of those is worse. She did not tell him the next day, or the day after. She watched herself become strange. She found reasons to be at the same buildings he was working. She asked questions about routine maintenance that she already knew the answers to. She approved his expense reports faster than she ever had. She was aware, distantly, that she was circling something she didn't know how to approach, and that circling was a kind of cowardice, and that she had been cowardly about this particular thing for 32 years, and was perhaps not going to stop now simply because the stakes had changed. Cora came to the office again, 3 weeks later. Same yellow raincoat, different drawing. This one appeared to be a tornado, or possibly a very energetic cat. What's happening here? Harriet asked, pointing. It's a storm, Cora said. My dad says you can always see them coming if you know what to look for. Harriet looked at the drawing for a moment longer than necessary. Your dad says a lot of useful things, she said finally. He knows a lot about buildings, Cora said, and weather, and when people are sad. Is that right? He says you're sad sometimes. He says it's because your husband died and that's allowed and we shouldn't make a big deal of it. We should just be normal. Harriet didn't know what to say to that, so she said, He's right. He's usually right, Cora said without any particular pride. just reporting facts. It was a Thursday in May when Harriet asked Aldous to stay after a site meeting. She had rehearsed it. She had a version where she started with the adoption registry. She had a version where she started with the bracelet. She had a version that began with an apology, and a version that began with an explanation, and a version she had written out on paper at 2 in the morning that started with, "I need to tell you something I have no right to ask you to receive." She used none of them. She said, "I need to tell you something difficult, and I want to be honest with you that I don't know how to say it, and I've been doing something dishonest by not saying it sooner." He looked at her. He put down his phone. He waited. She told him. All of it. The year, the decision, the registry, the file, the address, the photograph. She did not soften it or editorialize. She told him the way you tell someone the truth when you've run out of ways to make the truth easier, which is to say, plainly, with your hands in your lap, watching his face and letting it do whatever it needed to do. His face did several things. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "The bracelet, the hospital bracelet in the file, what did it say?" She told him the name. He reached into his shirt collar and pulled out a small pendant on a chain. Not decorative, just worn. The kind of thing a person carries not as jewelry but as proof. He turned it over. He showed her the back. The same name was engraved there, in the same style, because it was the same bracelet, or half of it, because someone at some point had cut it in two and given him one half to keep, and she had kept the other half in a shoebox for 32 years. Neither of them said anything. The afternoon light came through the office window and sat on the table between them, and didn't ask anything of either of them, which was more than could be said for most things. He did not forgive her that afternoon. She did not expect him to. She had lived long enough to know that forgiveness is not a door that opens the moment someone knocks. It is a door that some people find eventually, if they choose to look for it, and some people don't, and both of those are reasonable outcomes for something that was not reasonable to begin with. He left the office. He drove to pick up Cora from school. He watched her run across the schoolyard with her backpack swinging and her raincoat tied around her waist, because she always forgot to put it on until she was already outside and already not cold enough to matter. He thought about the group homes. He thought about the family that had taken him in at 9 years old, in Sudbury, who had been kind in the way that people are kind when kindness is a policy rather than an instinct. He thought about the box of certificates his social worker had kept, report cards and medical forms, and the paper that said his name had been changed. He thought about the half bracelet he had been given at 18 with a card that said only, "Kept for you." He thought about the woman in the office who had spent 32 years not knowing he was 8 kilometers away, and who had hired him without knowing, and who had kept the other half of the bracelet in a box behind her husband's golf equipment. He thought about Cora asking for a snack and drawing bears for security purposes and telling him, that evening when he asked how she'd spent the afternoon, that the lady with the filing cabinets was sad but trying. "She's sad but trying," Cora had said, with the specific gravity of a 7-year-old who had decided this was important information. He hadn't asked who she meant. He hadn't needed to. He called the office number 2 days later on a Saturday morning, which was not a workday. He didn't know why he called the office number instead of her cell. Maybe because it felt like a boundary he needed, a door with a frame around it, a conversation with an edge. She answered on the second ring, which meant she'd been there, or she'd been waiting, or both. "I'm not ready to call you anything," he said. "I'm not ready for this to be a relationship of any kind. I want you to know that." "I know," she said. "But Cora doesn't have a grandmother. Her other grandparents are in Nigeria and she sees them every 2 years. My adoptive mother died in 2019. He paused. "I'm not making a decision about you and me. I'm making a decision about her." A silence, not empty, the kind of silence that has weight. "I understand," Harriet said. I don't know if I'll ever be past this, he said. I want to be honest about that. You don't owe me anything, she said. I want to be honest about that. He looked out his apartment window at the street below, at the Saturday morning version of Barhaven, dog walkers, and a woman with a stroller and a kid on a bike who kept stopping to inspect something in the gutter, possibly a rock, possibly a worm, possibly nothing. She asked about you, he said, this morning. She asked if we were going to the office again. Harriet was quiet. I told her we might, he said. I told her there was a lady there who might want to show her the filing system. He heard something on the other end of the line that was not quite a word. It was the sound of someone managing not to fall apart in a phone call, which takes a specific kind of effort that most people never have to use. Thursday works, Harriet said when she could. Thursday works, he said. He hung up. He stood in his kitchen for a while. He thought about the bracelet. He thought about the parallel lives that had existed. Quietly, 8 kilometers apart. 2 people carrying the same name on their bodies without knowing. Both going about the business of living. Both keeping things they couldn't explain in drawers and pockets and boxes in the back of closets. He didn't know what it would become. He wasn't ready to know. He knew only that he would drive Cora to that office on Thursday, and that Harriet Colborne would probably have a better snack this time, and that Cora would ask an unanswerable question and make a drawing that somehow, in its 7-year-old logic, would be more honest than anything the adults in the room were prepared to say. That was enough, for now. That was a place to start. Some things take 30 years to find their way back to you, and sometimes they walk in through the front door wearing steel-toed boots and a jacket 2 sizes too large, and you hand them a set of building keys, and the world continues on in its quiet way, not knowing what it has just done. If you've ever held on to something, a box, a bracelet, a name, waiting for the moment it would make sense, tell us in the comments. And if you believe doors, no matter how long they've been closed, are still worth opening, you already know how this story ends.